Morning. Hello. Hi, Rue. So it is Saturday. I think we've had all of the cats in this vlog, so that's at least a win. Saturday morning, I am diving back into January 15th. I skimmed the part that I had already read, kind of because my brain was not working with all the multiple characters. It does look like there are only 4 perspective characters, and we are working through those 4 characters over the course of a day. So seeing how their day turns out. So I also forgot today is April 1st, and that means it is the big announce of the octafinals for Book 2 prize round. So we're gonna get all the vlogs and all the exciting stuff to see who's moving forward. It is also our fantasy bingo card announcement day, the start of the new challenge card. It's a standard bingo, it's 25 squares with a prompt each, lasts a year from April 1st to May 31st every year. And I somehow, I knew, but I didn't remember that it was happening, so I'm gonna try really hard to not let my weekend get totally distracted by planning and looking into all the stuff for the different prompts. I probably will get sidetracked a little bit, but I am going to try to really go hard this weekend and finish up my 3 novellas that I have, because I have so much I want to read this month, but we're going to do it. We're going to really try. So I want to try and finish this today.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Book 2 Prize channel. My name is Robert, and today we're here for the announcement of the first round results, the octafinals results, and the pairings for the second round.
Hello again. It's supposed to storm this afternoon, but it is pretty nice out, so I'm in the car, I'm at the park. I'm gonna try to get a walk in today outside, because it's actually nice and warm and clear for now, and then we're supposed to get rain for 3 days, so this may be the last time outside for a bit. I finished my audiobook of Taste by Stanley Tucci, so I'm going to be diving into Spear by Nicola Griffith? I can't remember. Griffin, I think. And it is short, but it is not quite a novella. So it's not in for this vlog. I'm not going to try to finish it, but that's what I will be audiobooking while I walk. Swampy in here. Really wet. A lot of trees down. So exciting. I love a good poke bowl. Hello, much later in the day. It is Saturday still. I got sidetracked, but I did finish January 15th a few hours ago. So I wanted to come back and wrap this up, because I did other stuff and I didn't want to forget until tomorrow. So I don't know, based on the time now, if I will finish another novella. I'm going to try to at least start one. But in terms of this one, I enjoyed it a lot. It was not what I expected, though. And I should say, Rachel Swirsky, the author of this, wrote a short story, If You Were a Dinosaur, My Love, that is one of my favorite short stories of all time, probably. It's fantastic. It's so emotional. It's playful, but also very, very hard-hitting as it goes along. And it's quite short, so it really does something with the short length. And this one I don't think was as emotionally connected for me, and it wasn't what I expected, in that it's kind of bleak. So this is interesting because it has maybe a format or style aspect that it is playing out a single day over the course of this novella, and it's a pretty long novella. This is the longest novella that I had. It's around 230 pages. And it is jumping between 4 perspectives at different times over the course of the day. So you get each person's perspective at each morning, mid-morning, afternoon, etc. So I liked that style choice on how to execute the book. I think that was great. In terms of the plot and what this is doing, this is mildly speculative. I would almost say this isn't really that speculative. I wouldn't necessarily put it totally in sci-fi. It is just looking at universal basic income. And if you're not familiar with that concept, it's just something where effectively people get a payout from the government. Everybody pools their money through taxes, and everyone gets a standard income out of it. Basically, the living wage. And there are lots of ways to do that, or reasons to do that. There's been quite a bit of study on that. It's something I'm a proponent of. So I know a fair amount about UBI already. So that is not really explained in here as a concept. There's a brief note at the beginning that kind of talks through the basics of what it is. It doesn't address any of the study or research about the effects of that. So this is purely a speculation of the possible ideas of four people's lives and the results of how that might impact them. But for me, it was very bleak in those four people's lives. So let's talk through what those four people's lives are, I guess. The first one is a woman with her two children, and they are clearly in hiding on the run from her abusive ex-wife. The next person is a newscaster who kind of is in this, she feels like it's a dead-end job where she's just doing news for aggregates. That's kind of dumb. And what she's doing at this point is going around and collecting interviews of people's reactions to what they're going to do with their UBI payout on January 15th, because this is the day that UBI pays out every year. And so the third one is kind of the most odd, I guess, but probably also the most affecting, is a girl with a group of rich kids who are treating the UBI payout as kind of a game. They treat it as waste day, and they figure out inventive ways to waste the money the worst so that they don't actually provide any use for that money. So very snobby and gross rich affluenza. And the last is a girl. She's a teenager who is pregnant, who is very clearly part of an FLDS, fundamentalist Mormon sect. And she and some other girls are walking to pick up their checks because they're required to do that. And so we learn quite a bit about, her life and the difficulties she's facing because of that, and how her community treats this UBI payout as well. So, as I said, I was very mixed on this because it was so very bleak. I tend to have a more, maybe it's a biased view, but I do tend to have a more positive or optimistic view based on the actual research that we have had come out of UBI. We had whole towns get UBI payments in order to study what the outcomes would be. So we have a lot of good information about how people react to getting UBI. And for me, based on things we know about the very first character, I think I could talk about this. We know right up front the fact that she is this domestic violence survivor who has fled with her kids, and it was the UBI payment that allowed her to get out of that relationship. And so we find out quickly that her abusive ex is continually hunting and chasing her down. And so she is always on the run and always in fear. That's like the most bleak take on that that you could have, right? For me, I'm rarely the optimist, but I would tend to think that it would be more the majority outcome that having that money and being enabled by that money to get out of a DV situation would actually result in them getting away and having a true escape and feeling freedom, not having their abuser pursue them for years on end, incessantly over multiple moves. I mean, that is going to happen. There are cases like that constantly, but that's not the majority outcome. So I do feel like this took very negative views on all four of the stories. And I kind of understand why it was doing that. It was trying to show, or the author was trying to show, that having money is not a magic fix, and that there will still be, even if we had this in place, people on different political sides arguing for why it's good, why it's bad. People's lives being just simply complicated is going to make it not be a simple thing. It's going to have challenges and pose difficulties to people's lives based on the way that it's dispersed. So I think it was trying to get across that nuance and instead just went very negative and very bleak. The end, the last section was just very hard to get through. So it had the same level of like not emotionality, but like really giving you a gut punch at the end that the short story that I read did, but I wasn't as connected to the characters there as I was in the short story that I'd read before, and so it didn't have the connection and impact, I don't think. So I did actually like this very much. I think it was a really interesting and probably the most thought provoking of the things I've read. So it really was the most engaged I have been in this project so far. So that makes it really hard to rate and place this in my rankings of the novellas. But was it just too bleak? I don't know. Just started raining, and it is very stormy. Okay, I'm getting wet. My reading list for this vlog has turned out to be much more fluid than expected. But I started Our Wives Under the Sea, got a little bit into it, not much. It was on my original plan. However, I got into it and realized it seemed like there was quite a bit more text or smaller text than everything I've been reading. So I tried to look up the word count, and the best estimate I could get was around 70,000 words. And a novella is 40,000 words. So I think this is not going to count as novella. I am going to read it. I was enjoying it very, very much the first couple chapters. But I think I'm going to get to it later in April as a novel for 2022 novel, potentially, rather than novellas. And even though the page count is much lower than two of the novellas I've read, the text count is potentially too high. So this one is going back on hold, but we did have a fun discovery. So this was a library book, and somebody left their bookmark in. This looks very much like a local bookshop's design, but a little slightly different. So I was like, oh, maybe it's an old or new design, whatever. But then I flipped it over, and it's a super cute non-local bookshop, the Green Dragon Bookshop in Fort Dodge, Iowa. And I looked them up, and they look absolutely lovely. A little sci-fi fantasy focused bookstore. Super diverse from what I could tell. They had a whole spread of books for the trans rights readathon. Like, really cool. So, hi Ripley. So there will definitely be a visit there in my future at some point if I'm ever in Iowa. It's not too far away, but it's quite a few hours away. So yeah, very cute little discovery. Let's wrap things up finally. So I did finish What Moves the Dead by T.King Fisher, my last novella for this vlog project, and I enjoyed it a lot. I was very surprised, not because I expect to dislike T.King Fisher, but obviously it has a pretty strong animal element to it, or I thought there was going to be a pretty strong animal element to it, and there was much less of that than I expected. So if you're worried about that going in, this is very much more an atmospheric gothic horror based on The Fall of the House of Usher from Edgar Allan Poe, which, interestingly, that's only about a 20-page story, and I think she really fleshed it out, which is what she's kind of been doing in her horror work. She's been looking at these short, classic horror works and really building them into something larger. And that's what she's done here, I think. And Kingfisher is such a master of short work that this was such a gripping read, and I literally couldn't put it down. I sat down, I think, and read it in 2 sittings. It's like 140 pages. So that wasn't like super challenging, but for most of these novellas, I've been, reading 15, 20 pages and setting them down and, going to do stuff, coming back to them. This one, I literally didn't want to pause at all and only paused when I had to. So it was great experience for reading. I think this is the best executed of the novellas that I've read. And I think T. Kingfisher does write so much short work that she's really practiced at doing that, at sort of doing a start to finish story, making it really cohesive and work well. And this, everything just felt on point. From the tone, the world building, the plotting, the characterization was great. So I would be very interested to hear if people didn't like it, what didn't work for them, because I feel like this is just such a great execution of a novella form. And I'm not a big horror reader, but this story is so great because it is very atmospheric, and that is the focus. So maybe it could be too slow for people, I guess. So what is the story? The story is this character, Easton, who is a friend of the Ushers, Roderick and Madeline, a brother and sister. And Easton has received a letter from Madeline saying that she's dying and to come from away and visit and see her. And so Easton shows up. Now, Easton is an interesting character because they are from a non-real location. This is firmly rooted in reality, real world at least. There's America and Britain are referenced constantly. But Easton is from a non-real place. And that's not a huge element other than that who they are as a person, their identity, and the culture that they came from is slightly different. And there is an explanation of Easton as being from this culture that has a range of different pronouns. So Easton is a person who certainly has a pronoun and has a gender, but does not have a real world pronoun that we would identify. So it's not an ungendered or non-binary protagonist, but I'm not going to use like he or she to reference them. So that was a really interesting element, and it's not a huge part. It's just kind of dropped in discussing the place that Easton is from, and really incorporated well into the beginning of the novel. And so then when we hear these pronouns being referenced later on, it makes sense why that's happening, where that's coming up. So there are a couple of references to these non-real places over the course of this as they're discussing their background as soldiers together, Easton and Roderick, and how they kind of got to know each other and things like that. And we're seeing Easton come into this house, and as soon as Easton arrives, the air is just ominous. And that's where T. Kingfisher's sense of atmosphere is just so good. Like, you can feel the damp and the dark to this house. It's been allowed to really run down. They can't afford to heat the whole manor, and so they only heat certain rooms, and the rest of it is just, as I said, damp, and it's ruinous. It's really rotting away. And so Easton comes in and is just kind of shocked by the state of the place, shocked at the state of their friends. They're almost unrecognizable. Roderick and Madeline have sort of wasted away. And so when Easton gets there, though, it's not as much like fear, it's concern. And I think that's the important thing to the way that T. Kingfisher writes characters, is it's always about the connectedness between them. And so you have this deep emotional feeling drawing you between Easton and the other characters, where Easton is just desperate and wants to get them out, wants to convince them to try anything for their health, and is scrambling to try and save their friends. And I just love that sense to this story, where Easton is just such an empathetic character. So I think that was really well handled. And one of the not major changes, but one of the key changes I think that Kingfisher makes from the original is that in the original story, it's a character who is looking back on something that's happened. And here we're seeing and feeling things from Easton as they're happening. We're in the perspective as they're arriving to this house and going through everything that's going on in the moment and learning new facts. We also have this quirky character who I feel like I have to imagine is maybe a somewhat self-insert for Kingfisher herself, who is a fungus researcher. And I really enjoyed that side character. And that is a total addition, I think, from the original. Or I don't remember anything like that in the original. I think the original was pretty well focused on just the POV character and the two ushers. So we have a little bit broader cast. There's also a doctor who's there kind of taking care of them, and it expresses how little the medical profession knew, even though the doctor that's there is well-intentioned. The doctor admits, like, there is only so much we can do, and certain ailments are basically just us saying, oh yeah, you've got a collection of problems and we can't explain them. So it was really interesting to see that, like a self-aware perspective who is well-intentioned but just doesn't have the information to help. So I very much like that. As far as the atmosphere, the vibe, the actual horror, it was so well done. It ramps up slowly. If you've read previous T. Kingfisher horror novels, there is a definite like escalation as things go along. And this one I don't think escalates as rapidly. It's got a very steady pace to escalating the horror elements and what's unsettling about it. But I don't think it ever goes beyond unsettling to shock. Like, everything that is happening, I sort of knew was coming. I don't think there were any surprises to the story, but it's all about the execution of the sense of dread within the character and the ways that it feels like this house is kind of closing in on you almost. It certainly feels very claustrophobic as you're reading along, increasingly. And so it's all about your physical reaction to the story more so than like giving you massive scares or gore. So I think that's about it, what I have to say. As I said up front, I think this was like the most cohesive story. It knows exactly what it is and is executed so perfectly from characters. The writing style is like period appropriate, I would say. Like, it has that vibe of being an actual historical work or classic work, and it has everything to do with the sense of place is just so well handled. So I think this was just a really great book. Was it my favorite, though? That is hard to say. I don't think this is a favorite of mine for a T. Kingfisher book. I think objectively I can look at this and say, this is probably a really strong work in her catalog, near the top. But for me, I don't think so. I don't think this is like a new favorite of all time as a book for me. So everything about it was so readable and great and enjoyable in the moment, but I don't think it's going to be one I remember constantly or refer back to or want to reread. So I think that's where that one sits. So let's talk through my recap here. Now, starting at the bottom, the worst novella that I think I read was Bishop's Opening by R.S.A. Garcia. I think the writing was fine. I didn't actually like it. I didn't find anything memorable in it. And I actually have since gone through and skimmed through in text. I listened to the audio to see what I missed. Like, did I not get something that was there? And yeah, I just couldn't find the through line to the story or anything to grasp onto with it. It very much felt like it was a story of sci-fi that wants to be a big space opera, but done in this really small scale and limited package, and it just didn't have anything to it. So I don't know. I didn't grasp the characters. I am a couple days later struggling to remember anything about the story or the characters. So I think that was just massive disappointment. The next one is The Tread of Angels by Rebecca Roanhorse. And as I have spent time past this and continue to read better novellas, I have actually kind of downgraded this. I didn't dislike it, again, but it didn't work as a novella. It's totally not cohesive. So this one, I do have, props for the world building on its own was really interesting. The plot of the story was interesting. It was a murder mystery. And in the world building, we're in this sort of very stratified angel world that's also weird Western. And neither of those things integrate for me. So it's very separate. It's not very cohesive. And it just didn't come together. So I'm a little bit bummed out about this one because, I wanted to like it so much. But yeah, I don't think this was successful as a novella. The next one I think is actually going to be January 15th. And we're kind of into the territory where they were all good. So this one I enjoyed very much. I think this was the most engaged that I was. It is so well handled in terms of the style. So this is a story of very near future. 4 characters playing out each of those characters' perspectives over the course of a single day when universal basic income is paid out, and how that payment would affect their lives. And in terms of the world building, there's some world building there, but it's so close to our own. I feel like this doesn't have any imagination to it in that aspect. I was the most engaged with this book from the style perspective. That play out of the 4 perspectives over the course of the day was inventive, I think, in that aspect. And the thought experiment, the ideas to thinking through how UBI would impact people's lives was very engaging as well. So it engaged me on those 2 levels very much, but on everything else, I talked about this quite a bit in my update. It felt very bleak and very one note in how it perceived what could happen through this, and not very hopefully. So it did feel a little maybe biased for me, but I might be biased in the opposite direction. I don't know. However, I did enjoy this very much, and this was the longest of the books, and I didn't feel that length at all. I think Swirsky is another author who's really adept at writing in a short format, so I think that was handled really, really excellently. It kept me rolling along as a reader, very definitely. I think all the characters were very believable, real people, so that was also well handled. So pretty much good marks on everything to do with this, except that it wasn't innovating in terms of any imaginative content. It's basically real world. It's all things that could very, very much be happening today. So yeah, I think it was a great, great book. Then we have one that had one major issue with it, really, but was my favorite up until then. So Sisters of the Forsaken Stars. We are following nuns in space, in deep space, who are, all very adept, skilled astronauts, basically. And there's so much to the conversation. This is a sequel, so I can't talk too much about plot, but there's so much to this conversation in this story about religion and politics and the idea of doing what's right over doing what's expected of you within your religious duty. So really nuanced, great, slow-moving conversation. So this one won't be for everyone, but I think it was very much for me for most of the book or novella. But then at the very end, and I'm pretty sure this actually happened with the first one as well, toward the end, it kind of went off the rails and tried to really speed up and throw in a lot of plot and didn't handle it in the way that I found believable or was totally on board with. And I think, as I said, that happened in the first one. So that may be something that the author is doing or thinks they need to these to pull in your typical reader. And I would have been totally on board except for the way it went off the rails at the end. So So I liked the majority of it and was the most emotionally behind this book. So it was my favorite for most of the book. Love the characters in this one. The characters as these hyper competent women who have survived in deep space with the goal of empathy toward people, to the point where, you know, they have made very hard choices about how to do that. And each of them is so distinct, and we have a range of ages. And I just love that aspect, that it's a pretty much all woman cast, and they're so varied. Great representation as well throughout this duology. And the world building, it is a completely different world because we're in space where many planets have been colonized, and it feels believable. Like, there's a whole political system behind it. As I said, there's a religious system at play here that is also interacting with the political system. So there's a lot going on there, and yet it feels fleshed out and believable. So I really, really like this duology, and I want to see more from the author. I would like to see a longer work where maybe some time to actually ramp up between the slower elements and kind of a bombastic ending will work better, maybe. And then I think my favorite is probably between these two, and I honestly couldn't tell you which one is my favorite. So this one was the most well executed, but I didn't like it as much. This one, emotionally, I liked very much, and it's mostly well executed. It had only a few things that I didn't get along with, but even though I knew the end is just such a masterful murder mystery that's engaging with so many different elements of the setting. So we're in historical Chicago. We have a lesbian character, so we have sort of diversity and representation there of the sort of oppressive society at the time, and the desire to get away and have a life in San Francisco, start over. That sort of one last job to get it done, to get out, is a major element of this. We also have a lot of world building, even though it is set in real world. Unlike our one that's totally real world, basically. This one is real world, but it has so many magical elements to it, so much innovation, because we have a whole world of, our main character is a warlock who's doing sort of private investigating into these ritualistic killings, and they're in a world of angels and demons. And so we have this whole paranormal world surrounding this that is well crafted, I think, really well crafted. And the characters, between these different paranormal type elements are so believable, and they have distinct personalities that make sense for who they are, whether they're angels or demons or whatever their role is. And there's also a great family element. So much like T. Kingfisher, this one pulled at my heartstrings because we have this close lesbian relationship where we have a love relationship. We also have a family relationship between a brother and sister that just really has a depth to it that you wouldn't think you could achieve in a novella length, because they're barely on page, but we feel their initial conflict and estrangement, and they're kind of becoming a little bit closer, moving forward, and the different changes of that relationship are present. So yeah, I mean, there's so much to do with relationship in this story, even though it's very much in the background. So I like this one so much as well. So I'm gonna have a very difficult time with deciding where my tops and bottoms are here. And yeah, I enjoyed so much about all of these novellas. I'm very happy to be wrapping up this project. It was a lot of reading to get through. As I said, this was just barely over a week. It was like 8 days to read all these novellas. We've got 6 novellas total, 5 in print and 1 on audio. So that's a lot. Plus I was reading other stuff. So I think we did good for getting into the Hugo voting, and I'm gonna have to do some hard thinking about what I want to put forward. So thank you so much for sticking with me. If you enjoyed my first vlog, let me know down below in the comments. Thanks. I'll